Hi all, and welcome back to part 2 of lesson 3. In this part, we're going to be discussing functions you can do with lists. To start us off, I'm going to talk about the sample list I've created to go through all of these function examples. Here we have our sample list, seawater, and that's our variable name that we're attributing to our list. And it contains the 6 ions in seawater with the highest concentrations. Each item in the list is another list that has the ion name, the chemical symbol, and the percent of total ions. So that's what's right here. And below it is more lists containing the next 4 highest concentration ions. And we're going to use those all to showcase the common list functions that we're going to be using throughout the course. So to start us off, adding items to a list. One way to add items to a list is to just add a single item at the end. And to do that, you use the append function. So for example, we have our original seawater list here, and we want to just tack this bicarbonate item onto the end here. And what we do, we say seawater.append bicarb, and that's the variable name for the bicarbonate list here. And when we print seawater, we can see that now bicarbonate's at the end. Notice that doing this, it alters the list in place, so it does alter the original seawater list. You don't have to set anything equal to this to keep it going, it just automatically alters it in place. Another way to add items to a list is to extend it, which adds multiple items to the end of the list. So instead of just adding bicarbonate here, we add bicarbonate, bromide, borate, and strontium. And we just tack those all on the end. And in order to do that, we say seawater.extend, parenthesis, and then we put all of those items actually into a list of itself. And then we close the parenthesis there. And that will effectively put bicarbonate, bromide, borate, and strontium onto the end of our original seawater list. Again, this is altering the list in place. You don't need to set a variable equal to that. Now, there's a little bit of a subtle difference between append and extend. With append, you can actually put the same arguments in where you have this list, bicarb, bromide, borate, and strontium. However, when you do that, it actually adds all of those as a single list item. So you can see here, there's an outer bracket, and then there's bicarbonate item, bromide item, borate item, and strontium item, and then there's a closed bracket, which means that it's a single list item at the very end of this list, rather than taking each individual item in that list and creating a new item in the seawater original list. So that's what extend does. It takes each of those and it creates a new item. Another way to add items to a list is actually to concatenate 2 lists together. And concatenation, very similar to strings, you just use this plus sign here. And here we have our seawater plus bicarb, bromate, borate, and strontium, trying to add those 4 in there again. And notice that it's again in a list because we want to add 2 lists together. So notice that this does not alter the list in place. In order to save it for later, you actually have to set a new variable name to it. And you can see we have our original list here, and we have those other 4 that we want on the end. When you want to add just a single item using concatenation, you can do that as well. But you have to be very cautious about adding with lists because very similar to extend, when you just concatenate 2 lists together, it will take all of the items inside of the second list and tack it on to the first list. So here we have seawater, and then when we add just bicarb, we take each of the items from bicarb and we create a new item in this seawater new here. Instead, if you want to add this whole thing as one item, you have to put brackets around it, and that will effectively make that just one item in our seawater new. Again, not altering seawater, but creating a new item there. Another way to add items to a list, instead of adding them to the end, you can put insert, right? So it adds a single item to a given index in the list. So for example, if we have our original list here and we say, oh, let's add bicarbonate, bromide, and strontium, we can do that using extend. So we use bicarb, bromide, and strontium. And when we print seawater, we see those 3 have been added, and we say, oh no, we forgot borate. So instead of having to go back and put this here and run it again, we can just say, okay, seawater.insert 8, which is the index where we want it, right? Because it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we want it right at 8. And then we say borate, because that's the item we want to put there. And as you can see, it puts it in there and it bumps that one right down. So that's all of the ways to add items to a list. Now let's talk about how to remove items from a list. First way you can do it is using the remove function. And that actually deletes the first occurrence of a given item. For example, if we were to insert bicarbonate at the top of our seawater list, and if we were to append bicarbonate at the back of the list, it would happen twice, right? And now we say, oh no, I don't want it at the beginning. So what you can say is seawater dot remove bicarb, and that's the bicarbonate item here. And what it's going to do is it's going to remove that first item, but it's actually going to keep the last one intact. So it will just remove the first occurrence of the given item. Notice that the input that you have in there has to be in the list, otherwise this won't work. It won't be able to remove something that's not there. Another way to remove items from the list is to use the del function. This function is actually pretty powerful. It can delete the items in a given index. So for example, we have our seawater list here, and we say del seawater 3 colon nothing. And as you recall, that just says 3 to the end. So if we go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to delete those 3. And yeah, you can see chloride, sodium, and magnesium remain. However, the del function can also delete the whole list, or it can delete any other objects. So if you say del seawater, and then you try and print seawater, you're going to get an error because you just deleted it. So be very cautious using del and make sure that you're not deleting anything that you don't want to delete or that you can't get back. Another way to remove items from a list is to use the pop function. And this actually removes and outputs the indexed item that you're taking out of the list. So for example, we have our list here, and I say, oh, I want to take out sodium. So I say the second highest sodium is equal to seawater.pop, and I'm going to put the index value where sodium is, which is 0, 1 here. So we say print seawater, and you can see it's taken out sodium. Now I say, I also want to take out chloride. So I put first highest, and that is equal to seawater.pop 0, right? Because it's in the 0 position. And I print seawater, and you see it's taken that out as well. The kind of cool thing about pop is that those things don't just disappear. If you set these variable names equal to this pop function when you do it, you can actually call those things later on. So when I say print first highest, it prints that chloride list that I deleted earlier. Same thing when I say print second highest. It prints that sodium list that I deleted way up here. That's all the ways to delete items from a list. Now let's talk about reverse. This one is pretty self-explanatory. You use the reverse function, seawater.reverse, and it turns the function on its head. So instead of chloride, sodium, magnesium, sulfate, calcium, potassium, it's the other way around, right? It's potassium, calcium, sulfate, magnesium, sodium, and chloride. Pretty self-explanatory. So setting a variable equal to a list and then changing the list actually changes the object that the variable is pointed to as well. So when you try and print that variable, you're going to have it changed. So let me give the example here. You have del seawater 3 to the end, right? So we just have those chloride, sodium, and magnesium. And I've set top 3, just a variable name, equal to that bit of the list. I print both of those, and they should absolutely look the same, right? But then I extend just seawater with bicarbonate, bromide, and borate, right? I haven't touched top 3, but when I print seawater and I print top 3, look, they match now. And that's because the top 3 item is pointing at the same thing as the seawater object. In order to avoid that, you can actually use the copy function. So if instead I had said top 3 equals seawater.copy, this sort of creates a new version of the same stuff as this top 3 variable. So when I say seawater.extend bicarb, bromate, and borate, it alters seawater there, but it keeps top 3 intact. Finally, there's one last thing you can do when lists only have strings in it. You can combine the different string items into a single string object. So what I mean by that is that when you have just strings, right, in this case we have chloride, sodium, and magnesium, you can combine them into just one string instead of having 3 separate items in a list. And you do that using the join function. So here we create this delimiter, which is just a space, and we say seawater string, so that's our variable name, is equal to our delimiter, our space, dot join seawater top 3, so our list here. And what that does is it takes the first item in the list and it prints it into a string, and then it takes this delimiter and it puts it between the first and the second, and then it takes this one, puts it there, and then a space, and then the next item in the list, and however many items in the list you have, they're all going to be joined together as a string, separated by the delimiter. If you want to put that string back into list format, you can use the split function, in which case you put your string variable name dot split, and you split at the delimiters. So in this case, we're splitting at the spaces, and you can see that put that back right there as seawater top 3, chloride, sodium, and magnesium. So what happens if you don't use a space? What if you use a question mark? Well, it does the same thing. Again, using the delimiter, it goes chloride, question mark, sodium, question mark, magnesium, and it joins those strings together using the delimiter. And then when you split it apart again, it splits at the question mark, and then it gives you chloride, sodium, and magnesium. Here I've put all of the list functions we just learned, so you guys can see sort of a put together list. Here's sort of what they do. Here are some of the caveats and warning signs, and then here are some examples of how to do those. So use this for reference as you need. That's all we have for this lesson, and the next one will be object types.